The Pope's response has been tone deaf at best.
Pathetic.
Evil at worst. He literally said, I will not speak a single word about it. I'm like, no, you know what? Speak some more words. Speak a lot of words. I want to hear a lot of words from you, Pope Francis. Very glad to have our next guest. We're having him back. Last time, him and I were disagreeing, very respectfully, might I add, on Convert Crowder Week. And I think today we'll probably be agreeing quite a bit. He's been at the forefront, kind of speaking out against really, corruption within the church, period, across the board. Been very consistent, and I wanted to get an expert's opinion as a non-Catholic outsider. You can follow him on the Twitter at Michael_Voris, as long as they allow him to, churchmilitant.com. Mr. Voris, how are you, sir?
Hello, Stephen. How are you? Yeah, as long as they allow us to. That's true.
Yes, I don't think Pope Francis will be in trouble anytime soon with the climate change and polar bear tweets. But this interview might be banned.
Don't forget the plastic straws. There's lots of plastic straws in the ocean. Don't forget those either. Yeah, big, horrible crisis.
The paper straws. It seems as though I'm glad that this man has his priorities straight. Okay, so let me ask you this before we go. Obviously, the sex scandal now has been covered. Most people know what's going on, but a lot of people don't really know the details. Could you fill people in who don't know exactly where did this start? The more recent scandal. I mean, I know we can go back obviously far, kind of in the church history, early 2000s. But what we're talking about right now, why are we talking about this? Where does it stem from?
The bottom line is this all sort of came to fruition because of a series of events. Really, this summer, it's kind of faithful Catholics refer to it as the summer of shame, actually.
It doesn't sound like a fun summer. That's not a good summer advertising campaign.
I don't think that's sort of, I'm pretty sure that's not a Beach Boys hit. I'm pretty sure. But the former Cardinal of Washington, D.C., now retired, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, it was announced about him by the New York Archdiocese, which is where he was originally ordained as a just lowly priest back in the 40s or 50s, that a credible allegation had come forward that he had groped an altar boy in the rectory, in the sacristy, where you get dressed for Mass, put on the vestments, of St. Patrick's Cathedral. At the time that happened, the boy was 14 or 15. Anyway, about a year ago, 6 months ago, he came forward, reported that. Nobody has ever been able to get a hold of the guy and say, why did you report this after 45 years? Nonetheless, he reported it after 45 years. The New York Archdiocese, because that's where it happened, took over the case. They did their investigation. At the end of their investigation, they concluded that what he was saying was in fact credible. And at that moment, the rules of the church kicked in, and the fact that he was a cardinal was kind of beside the point. What he had done, because it involved a minor, it doesn't matter that it was 45 years ago. Right. That had to be announced. Because he was a cardinal, the Pope had to be told, and then very shortly what happened.
Let's be clear, this is a little more severe than potentially drunken sex at a party 35 years ago with two who don't remember the place or time or have any evidence. Yeah, it's a little bit different.
Or even the year.
Right. Or even the general region. I don't even know what their main mineral export is where this happened. So I do want to make sure that when you say credible, because I do want to, this obviously goes back to the Vigano letter. This kind of all stems from this. A lot of people know a little bit about it, not necessarily a ton. There's quite a bit in there for people who haven't read it.
Sure.
So to kind of play devil's advocate here, you just said credible. So you think that Vigano is credible? You don't think that this is just holding like a personal grudge? Because there have been some theories, floated like that. What determines credibility in this instance? And I'll have a follow-up to that.
Okay, going back to, because Vigano is something that comes later in the summer.
Yes.
What made the Theodore McCarrick charges credible, generally when they're looking for credibility, is they're looking for something that substantiates what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And in a case 45 years ago, what they would generally look for is, when he was 14 or 15, did the teenage boy tell anybody back then? Are those people around? Can they be questioned? Do they remember it? You sort of dig all those sorts of things up. And now, while those aren't necessarily proof, they certainly lend more credibility than McCarrick, whose answer was, I don't have any recollection of this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's his whole defense. And the other guy said, so however they determined these charges were credible, those details we don't know, but typically in these kinds of cases, you look for corroborating evidence and people who can support the story from way back when, which is, of course, in the case of Kavanaugh and Ford, she has no corroborating evidence and nobody's supporting her story except just herself. So
it's not even her. She won't support her own story until there's an FBI investigation. Apparently, the FBI is really just
ain't gonna happen.
It's they see it like I think the DNC, they see it as the Oppo research arm. Like they don't realize that's not what the FBI is for, guys. They actually serve a purpose here.
Well, I mean, you got to give them some break here, Stephen. That's how they used it for 8 years under Obama. So old habits die hard.
This is exactly true. I mentioned the Vigano letter because that's how most people were introduced to it, because he obviously sort of corroborated the story with McCarrick, and he claimed that Pope Francis knew. That's where it kind of goes to the top, and I think that's where most people jump in and have been pretty upset about it. That happened later in the summer, but
there's a second set of stuff here that what Vigano is talking about is not about what was 45 years ago a teenage boy in the sacristy of St. Patrick's Cathedral. After this, McCarrick sort of developed a reputation once he became a bishop of homosexual assaults on multiple seminarians. When he was the bishop of Metuchen, he had the Diocese of Metuchen spend Catholics' money to buy a beach house.
Yeah, how do you develop that reputation, by the way? You said that he developed a reputation as a homosexual assaulter. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Okay, I want to make sure we're on the same page. Not like there's a nasty rumor that he's a serial homosexual assaulter. Okay.
Of seminarians.
Yes. Yeah. It's very niche. Very niche.
It's niche, all right. We know all of this was the case because a couple of dioceses in the early 2000s had to pay out. They paid out a total of $185,000 to different victims who had been seminarians. That he was a homosexual predator, rapist of seminarians at that beach house has been well known by zillions of people in the church, particularly in the hierarchy, for decades. And that is what Vigano, the former papal ambassador, was referencing in his expose, saying the Pope knew about that. Pope Francis knew about that. And what he says
do you believe that? I want to make, because again, I don't, you never know that Pope Francis knew.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Right.
Absolutely. His papal ambassador knew. If you go through sort of the testimony, your viewers, if they want to read it, they should. I mean, if it's a point of curiosity, but in some, the reason Vigano's testimony is so very believable. Okay, he gets a couple of minor things wrong. I mean, he's working. A date is off by a month here or there, that sort of thing. But the thrust of it is that this became known that Pope Benedict stepped in and after McCarrick had already retired and said, I want him to stop traveling around and being out there. He just needs to sort of quietly retire to a life of prayer and penance. He's going to be dead soon. So for the sake of scandal, we don't need to make all this public. Just retire him off the scene. And there was a big blow up in the nunciature, the ambassador's house, the Vatican ambassador house in Washington, D.C., because the Vatican ambassador called McCarrick in and told him this. Pope Benedict wants you quietly off the scene. And this huge argument blew up.
Why quietly, by the way? This is one thing that does bother, and as a non-Catholic observer, let me kind of explain this to you why, to me. This is my point of view. I've been to several of the different churches, and I've moved around. So I've had to attend different churches. There was one church where a man, an assistant pastor, wasn't sexual abuse of a child or anything, but had an affair. They kept it in the dark, and the guy moved on. He left. No one knew why. He was preaching at a church down the road. There was another church where a similar thing happened where I attended. They actually called in all of the elders and anyone who was a member of that church. They were as transparent as possible, moved him out, even though he helped plant that church and moved on down the trail. Well, you can guess where one pastor was able to continue preaching, the other one not ever again. So why in quiet? I don't understand this approach here at all.
Well, this secrecy or privacy thing is what really sort of has a good number, a good percentage of faithful Catholics kind of upset for the same reason you just said. I guess in some cases there is a principle, I suppose you could call it, a principle in canon law, the law which sort of governs the operation of the church and the sacraments, that somebody has a right to their good name, that you don't, even if something is true, if you don't need to say it about somebody, then don't. So in some cases, how you apply this depends. For example, the Pope just removed the bishop of the week after he retired, just removed him, accepted his resignation, and it became known from the Vatican that the Bishop Bransfield of Wheeling, West Virginia, Charleston, Wheeling, West Virginia, had in some, they didn't give the details of what it was, but it was inappropriate sexual contact with an adult. They didn't say if it was a male or female. Everybody thinks it's a male. So they announced that.
Why? Why does everyone? This is the question. Why is it always male? Is there an authority problem, or is there like a no cash or chicks ever? So there's a gay problem at the top of the church.
Well, now you come into a historical question. That's a very good question, because if you go and you look at sexual predation, abuse, both of minors and of adults. So you've got somebody, a guy, a softball coach molesting, teenage players on his team versus Harvey Weinstein. So it's sexual molestation. One's a crime. The other is also a crime, but this is like the more disgusting crime.
Yeah.
Out in the world, that is generally 85% heterosexual. Heterosexual males attacking, the opposite sex, whether it's girls or women.
Right.
In the church, with the clergy, it's just the opposite. And the reason is because such a large percentage of the Catholic clergy are homosexual. Now, we've been reporting this for years.
I know you have,
and we have been blasted by every official church, everything. Our own bishop here in Detroit will have nothing to do with us, told us to take the name Catholic out, although he didn't have a right to do that, but anyway, that's a side story. Yeah. Told us to take the name Catholic out of our
Do some Oppo research on him. Call the FBI, have him run an investigation. I bet you'll find some interesting tidbits there. Yeah, I know you've been at the front of this. I don't understand, if the goal here is to actually preserve sort of the purity of the Catholic Church. I don't understand the secrecy. I don't understand the silencing of people like yourself, how that helps. I understand it from a PR perspective, but I can't understand it from a theological, from a spiritual perspective at this point.
Yeah, because it's just become known at this point. Just kind of another series of gross, vomitous stuff coming out again. And I've said it before publicly. I'll say it here on your show. There are a large number. I don't know how to put a percentage on it, but there is a large number of Catholic clergy, including cardinals, bishops, priests, deacons, people who run seminaries, the whole bit, who hide behind the fact that they are clerics or clergy in the church, but who do not believe the faith. These are Judases. And, there is a saint who, I believe it was St. Augustine, but I might be mistaken on who it was, but there's a saint who said, in answer to the question, why would our Lord have picked Judas Iscariot, knowing that he was going to betray him? Well, obviously he knew he was going to betray him because he was God.
Yeah.
And
Plus
the answer was,
and that was kind of a giveaway.
See, it started back then.
It started back then. Jesus was like, what's the, okay, I know what's happening, but did you have to do it? You could have just, said him. All right, sorry, continue.
But I think it was St. Augustine, whichever saint it was, said one of the reasons that he did that was to demonstrate that even in the very close circle of his own intimates, those apostles, that even there, one could betray him. Mm-hmm. So and lead to his death. I mean, what did Judas ultimately do? I mean, he committed suicide out of despair, but the lead up to that was that he was part and parcel of deicide. Mm-hmm. He helped plan and execute the death of God. So if that could happen, and you're right in direct contact with Jesus himself, you wake up every morning, hello, Jesus, good morning, I'll go cook your fish for you. If you could do that.
No fire. Pow!
Yeah. Any of these other bishops could do the very same thing. And the Catholic Church has been, if you sort of look at the 2,000-year history of it, it really starts to kind of fall apart or break down along the lines of very good, holy, wonderful, magnificent saints, and kind of the opposite extreme of the spectrum, these horrible, vicious, diabolical, almost possessed in their mind and heart, haters of the faith, who also happen to be priests and apostles.
But in the case of Judas, right, I think it's important to note he's an outlier there. And in this case, at what point does the rule, does the exception become the rule? When you talk, for example, a disproportionate amount of it being homosexual assault. I mean, I think, what is it $500 million, if I'm not mistaken, or over $1 billion that have been paid out to victims?
No, it's, the total payouts for all of the sexual assault, and not all of the sexual assault was homosexual, but the vast majority of it was. But the price tag right now is very close to $4 billion.
See, I was way off. I was trying to take the most conservative estimate that I could find, but I appreciate that the Catholics giving me more leeway on this and being transparent about it. I mean, again, the question becomes, at what point is the exception now the rule? And why do you think so disproportionately in the church the homosexual abuse? Again, to an outsider, the Pope's response has been tone deaf at best,
pathetic,
evil at worst, in the sense that the only thing for evil to prevail, we know, is for good men to do nothing. So in this case, he literally said, "I will not speak a single word about it." I'm like, no, you know what? Speak some more words. Speak a lot of words. I want to hear a lot of words from you, Pope Francis. That's what I want to hear right now. As many words as humanly possible. How about that? Because that's someone's kid out there. The question becomes why, and what do people like you, true faith-following Catholics, what can you do about it?
Okay, that's a bunch of questions.
I know. Sorry. Okay, so the first question is why the disproportionate amount?
Well, the disproportionate amount is directly related to the disproportionate amount of homosexual abuse, be it to minors or seminarians and adults, non-minors, is owing directly to the larger proportion of homosexual men in the Catholic priesthood. There's just more of a percentage of homosexual men in the Catholic priesthood. So the question is, okay, how did that get to be the case?
Right.
And lots of research has shown that back in the 1920s and early 1930s, particularly here in the United States, around the world, but particularly here in the United States, Joseph Stalin, our lovely, Uncle Joe in, communist Russia.
Atheism has killed nobody.
Yeah, he's never killed anybody. That's right. Those show trials were not show trials. They were actually real things.
Religion is the cause of all wars. Yes, continue.
That's correct. He had made quite clear that he wanted the destruction of the Catholic Church and set about to do it. And one of the orders he gave that was picked up on by a woman here in the United States who was in the Communist Party here in the United States, her name was Bella Dodd. She placed roughly, her own, testimony, that she placed roughly 1,100, and I'm sorry, Stalin had said, make sure you put in smart guys, these are communist agents, make sure you get into Catholic seminaries, smart guys, who are able to pass themselves off as being very Orthodox, very Catholic, and the whole bit and everything, but who are homosexual. So she set out, and over the course of, I think it was actually 12, 13, 14 years, she recruited roughly 1,100 men who fit that bill and got them into seminaries. And as now, so
but how does that continue? Because that's a while ago, and they clearly these homosexuals don't breed. So how does it? Is it just they have like their apprentices, or they then appoint their successors?
Their understanding of going in was to sort of lay the dynamite for the destruction of the church.
Okay.
So they made sure that they were. Whenever they needed to be networked, they were networked with each other. They made, and look, they're going to excel. 1,100 guys. Some are going to excel up the ranks. Others are going to be kind of lowly, whatever, and just sort of hang out in the, the backwaters of the church.
And I get why they'd be attracted to it. I mean, Liberace, you guys have a lot of gold. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance. It's attractive. It's attractive to the gay. I don't blame them for that. The fashion sense matches up. That's not a bad thing.
You haven't been in a Catholic church in a while, have you, Stephen? Because that's not not what it looks like now.
Well, the Catholic Church is very beautiful. I'm talking about the Vatican. When people, if they watch it on TV, they're like, true. Oh man, to be a part of that, it's like going to a Liberace in his prime. Okay, so here's I guess my question, because we don't have a ton of time. So we go back, and I would like people to do research and read some of your material on kind of the history of the Catholic Church and Stalin, this sort of infiltration that I know you've written about quite a bit. You just mentioned sort of the investigations. Now, how do you think, considering that the church has been infiltrated, for lack of a better word, and we don't really know, no one knows whether it's a majority, a minority, or to what extent, how should the investigations be conducted? Because this is where faith in the institution erodes if it's being conducted internally by people at the church who, have been basically planted in by Stalin because they want to wear epaulets.
That's a good sum up.
Yeah.
Well, remember now, the folks who are problematic now probably aren't officially communist agents. They probably are not. But they were influenced by that. These were the ones who were picked to come into seminary, while other guys were blocked out of seminary.
Right.
And then you had the 1960s.
Like college professors. Most of them probably aren't actively, but, listen, the good ones got blocked out, and we end up with, UT Arlington. So.
Well, that's exactly true. I mean, there are a lot of parallels.
Yeah,
there are a lot of parallels. I mean, if you're talking about communism, and socialism, this sort of world domination thing, and these, this clash of world ideologies. Well, I mean, we as an American government, we tried to destabilize communist governments all over the world, and we did.
Sure.
And all of that. So, I mean, of course, the other side is doing that.
Right.
And if they're trying to destabilize Western civilization, which is exactly what communism was trying to do, and in some ways still is trying to do, well, of course you go after one of the establisher of Western civilization, which was the Catholic Church, and what upholds it. I mean, if you read a writer, the head of the Italian Communist Party in the 1920s and 30s, Antonio Gramsci, he comes right out and says, the Catholic Church has to be destroyed. We cannot take over the culture until the upholder of the culture, the Catholic Church, is wiped out.
So what else they should do? They should hire a really bad proofwriter for Joel Osteen's books and just feather him in there. But I do want to. How do you think these investigations should be conducted? Both what is theologically, what is morally correct, and what do you think would be the best way to go about it to rekindle faith in the institutions right now that I know for a lot of Catholics has been pretty tough. How should these investigations go?
Well, the investigation depends on, what level is the investigation happening on? Is it happening on the level of the universal church, and we're going to invest this one board with doing it? Is it going to happen, country by country? There is a lot of desire on the part of a good number of bishops in the United States to investigate on a number of different levels. Number one, the question is, how did McCarrick rise to that level that he rose to? Because he was probably the senior most powerful cardinal in the church.
Sure.
You might even say in all of American history, the history of the church in America. If that's a little bit of an overstatement, it is just a little bit of an overstatement. He had great influence, suggesting cardinals to be named, and he got Cardinal Cupich and Cardinal Tobin, Cardinal Cupich of Chicago and Joseph Tobin of Newark, named by whispering into Pope Francis's ear. Those two guys are the most. Cupich, to remind your audience, is the guy who said, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole of this. We have to worry about things like the environment. We're not going to worry about, clergy sex abuse stuff.
Right, yeah.
That's the guy that got picked by Pope Francis because McCarrick is whispering in his ear.
Meanwhile, McCarrick's going down the rabbit hole, yeah.
So people want to know, and bishops want to know, how did this guy get up to this power? You're not taking seminarians by the truckload, every other weekend to your beach house in New Jersey, raping them all, and nobody knows about it. So how did this happen?
Yeah.
What was interesting, as soon as that revelation came out, not the kid in New York revelation, that was one thing. That's what made it public and gave us all the ability to now begin talking about the adult sexual assaults on the seminarians. And when all of that started coming out and being freely talked about, the other thing was just the trigger for that. This is really the heart of the matter. And loads of bishops and priests and everything are saying, how did this guy get there? Who supported it? And of course, all the cardinals, Cardinal Sean O'Malley in Boston, Donald Wuerl in Washington, D.C. I mean, just go down the list, tick, 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 tick. And they're all like, well, I never heard anything about this. That's ridiculous. They're lying through their teeth.
And never trust a man whose name Sean O'Malley from Boston would actually be considered too stereotypical in a Jughead cartoon where no one would buy it. So should there be
Sean
an
O'Malley?
Sean O'Malley, yeah. Should
So
there
that's
be
the first thing they want to know is how did McCarrick rise? Who knew what? Who knew what and when did they know it? The second thing is Archbishop Vigano's testimony. It's 11 pages long. Boy, I tell you, it names names. It names names. It gives
it's evil stuff in there too. It's very chilling.
Witnesses who were there. That's a more of a kind of universal church thing. That's not. There's a lot of things in that testimony that pertain specifically to the church in America, which can sort of piecemeal be investigated and looked into and stuff. But his stuff, because of what he was essentially the ambassador. I mean, not essentially, he was the ambassador, the Pope's ambassador. First Benedict's for a couple of years, and then Pope Francis. He continued on after Pope Francis.
But I don't want to get too, because again, keep in mind, most people watching are not Catholic. And he said, when we're talking about, Vigano, he said, the Pope's full of it. So who investigates the Pope?
That's a good question. God.
Right, but who investigates the Pope, for any actual criminal act? Because it's criminal if there's cover-up. It's criminal if there's if he's complicit with this, if he's actually
here you run into all sorts of kind of international. He's got a number of different hats. One of them is he's the sovereign head of a sovereign state.
Right.
So who would do that? I can tell you this. I tell you one thing they are extraordinarily concerned about at the Vatican, not necessarily because they'd come and arrest the Pope and put him on trial or something, because I don't know who internationally has the authority to come and arrest any leader of a country and put him on trial for anything.
Right.
I mean, nobody can come and arrest Donald Trump. They should have arrested Obama and put him on trial for being stupid and liberal and socialist. But I mean, who would do that?
But the point is, though, with Donald Trump, obviously you see it with President Bill Clinton. Someone can be impeached. It's not only people he's appointed. It's effectively not a government that he's created investigating him. That is the difference, I think, with the Pope, and that is the problem we run into. There are more checks and balances against a president here than the Pope. You're right. He does wear a lot of different hats. Also, he wears a lot of different hats.
Yeah, he does wear a lot of different hats.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, if my political history serves me correctly, he's the last remaining monarch in Europe. So nobody, I mean, the way you got rid of kings before was to assassinate them. I don't think anybody's saying let's assassinate the Pope.
No, let's be clear. No one here is saying that.
However, there are different ways to skin a cat. And I can tell you from sources we have in Rome that people in the Vatican are horrified at the prospect of a RICO investigation. Again, not because that leads back to the Vatican and then they're able to slap cufflinks on or slap him with cuffs and haul him off to trial.
I'm sure he does get cufflinks slapped on quite a bit. Again, stylish guy. They have lots of very nice cufflinks.
You'll notice we don't make enough money here to wear cufflinks. I have a button-down polo shirt.
Well, it suits you. So there might be something going on. But here's kind of the question that obviously as a non-Catholic and as someone who loves all Catholics, non-Catholic Christians, period, right? But the issue here, theologically, I think a lot of people look at it and go, okay, we understand that obviously this Pope, most Catholics believe that when he speaks, ex cathedra, we're talking about theologically he's correct. But at this point,
which thank God he hasn't done.
It could be like Chauncey Gardner. So you don't know what's going to come out of that mouth at this point. Right now he's tweeting about polar bears and climate change. I will not say a word. Shut up! You're saying nothing but words, just not the ones that matter at this point. What is it all worth? This is a system. This is the way the church is set up. And even if it can be infiltrated, but at this point you have a guy at the top who either doesn't care or is complicit, and it seems like there's no way to take him out. So it seems like once you get past kind of the minutia, and we can get really nerdy theologically, obviously, as people who study it, but most people who don't, I can understand why a lot of people are having a bit of a crisis in faith, because this is kind of the rule of law, as you kind of described for the Catholic, the Church, the Vatican, and it seems broken.
Yeah, well, when any system that you have, a hypothetically bad actor in, who has some authority, and as you move up in our hypothetical situation here, a lot of authority, things can go bad. There's no such thing as a perfect system. But here's what we do know, is that the Catholic Church, the governance of the Catholic Church was instituted by Christ himself. he picked a bunch of guys that were kind of not sort of the best dudes around. One of them betrayed him. The other 11 ran away. The guy he picked to be the head of his little first band of apostles there betrayed him 3 times. Denounced him 3 times, swearing and cursing and blaspheming him and everything else. So, this is not the fact that there are human beings who have been given governance of the church doesn't mean, and who sometimes are bad. Yeah. The church has a history of many people who are bad. Like I said, it seems the way it kind of cuts is you get these people over here who are great saints and wonderful, holy people, and then you have the other side over here kind of on the far extreme. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot of people in the middle.
And I want to make clear, I agree. I'm not saying that every single person obviously is a sex offender.
No, I know that. I'm not defending. I'm just trying to paint the kind of the balance of the picture.
But Peter denied Christ before the rooster crowed. No, he didn't rape a kid. Let's keep this clear. Like Peter made some mistakes, but he didn't quite go over the bend that not around the bend that far. I think what really bothers people, it seems a lot of people, and we have a lot of Catholic viewers who obviously have felt in the past that there's been a media witch hunt. This is something and we do have to get going here pretty soon, but I could talk about this for a long time, and I appreciate you taking the time. A lot of Catholics in the past who felt that this was a media witch hunt, and in many cases were correct, not always, but in this case they're really tired of it. They feel hopeless because, like you said, well, what do we do with the Pope? I guess let God deal with them. They don't feel as though there's much they can do. But what is striking to me is that in this case, where you have more Catholics, as if I'm just going by the temperature of the audience here, who seem upset with it, but the media is not covering it nearly as much as when you go back to the early 2000s. Okay. Because
it's gay.
Oh, okay.
It's a striking flip here. And I don't think it's necessarily just the gay thing, but it's also because this is kind of the liberal, he's the Bernie Sanders Pope.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Look, you're not going to go out. If you go back and look at any of the media reports, most of the media reports, even the movie Spotlight, which overall did a good job sort of presenting the whole Boston exposure of all the child sex abuse stuff and everything back in 2002, won Academy Award
I thought it was very good. I'm glad to hear you say that because I thought it was very tastefully done.
I made it mandatory viewing for the staff here. I think we took 15, 20 people to go see it, and everybody who didn't see it had to go see it separately on their own. So, but if you notice in the movie, the way the movie presented it was the guy who was Richard Sipe, the man just died, who'd done a lot of the thing, the voice on the phone, comes right out and says, well, this isn't a homosexual thing, and it is a homosexual thing. So the media, the secular mainstream media, went out of their way to downplay, much like whenever, Muhammad blows up something, they say a foreign student, and they refuse to mention the fact that he's Muslim.
Yeah.
Well, that same thing was going on here with the treatment of homosexual clergy.
Right.
Were the ones doing the abuse. And now, this time around again, what has really come out, and that's why I kind of draw that distinction earlier when we were talking, between minors and adults, is that, however people might see, boys being attacked sexually and things like that, they can say, oh, the guy's just crazy, he's just psychologically immature, oh, he'll just go after altar boys because they're easier to get to. But when you're talking about an adult male who's, in his 30s or 40s going after a 20-year-old, a 24-year-old seminarian, that's gay.
Yeah.
That's gay. And that's gay. And at the end of the day, it's still gay.
Yeah.
And so they don't.
It's not child abuse anymore. It's just gay. And
it's just gay. It's gay, as we call it around here, or we write in our strips, homosexual predation on young men. That's what it has been. It's always been that. Some of these guys, some also sometimes went over and got younger boys.
Right.
But this has always been going on. Not always, I don't mean back to the time of the apostles, I mean of this recent 50, 60 years.
Right.
This has been a very, very prominent thing. This is able to be ignored by folks in the church because these people never really come forward and say anything. They are now, thank God.
Right.
And also, it's not something the media cares about because it undermines their whole narrative about, oh, gay is great and this is wonderful and let's have pride flags and, oh, this is an alternative lifestyle. No, the predominance of sexual abuse within the homosexual world is 10 times greater than it is in the heterosexual world.
Let me ask you this
And-
final question before we go. Would you say it's worse now than it's ever been in the history of the Catholic Church?
As far as crisis,
And as far as sexual abuse and misconduct?
it's hard to say as with regard specifically to sexual abuse and misconduct. I mean, first of all, this is all out in the open now, thanks to social media and this, that, and everything. That's one. Two, there's just more Catholics now than there's ever been. So I don't know if there's sort of a proportionality thing going on there. What I will say is that overall, the state of the church in the West, meaning the English-speaking world, the West, Europe, and the rest of the English-speaking world, England, America, Australia, etc., Philippines, has never been in a more sorry state.
Okay.
And I would lay 90% of the blame for that right at the feet of the bishops going back to the early part of the 20th century, who allowed this homosexual infiltration into the church, didn't check it. Some of them became involved in it, and it just began to snowball. And that's what we're seeing, right? What you're seeing here is the fruits of evil.
Well, I appreciate you disclosing that. I appreciate being so transparent, and I appreciate the answer. The reason I ask is because it seems that there's an inverse relationship between when the media says this is going to fix the Catholic Church, Pope Francis is going to come in and fix the situation. He's the best Pope we've had. He's the cool Pope. He's the of the people Pope. For people who really care about the Church, seems like your antenna should go up because, and that's why I wanted a Catholic's perspective. I do see it right now as in crisis, and obviously what's most important is solving the situation to make sure there are no more victims going forward. That's my number one priority. I think it's not everyone's number one priority who's a Christian concerned with the Catholic Church or any church at this point. All right, that is Michael_Voris on Twitter, as long as they allow you. Churchmilitant.com. Yes, final word, sir.
I was going to say, look, every time the church has been in a crisis before, it's 2,000 years, lots of crises, some isolated, some universal. The answer is now what the answer has always been, which is be a good Catholic. Live your faith like you are supposed to live it, which is with an eye to getting to heaven. You sin, you go to confession, you do whatever. Live a holy life. That's the point. Get to heaven.
Also,
you do that, and things will work out.
Also, avoid McCarrick's Beach House. That is Michael Voris. Thank you very much, sir. Hey there, YouTube viewer. If you like this video, I would say subscribe, hit the notification bell, or watch one of these videos playing in a box that we've personally uploaded and programmed for your viewing pleasure. The problem is now, in today's day and age on YouTube in 2018, any of those three things that you do, any of those three buttons that you click will take you directly to a Seth Meyers video. So stay here and join Mug. Get off of here. Go to loudwithcrowder.com/mugclub. It's the only safe place you can go and join.